Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist Integrity doing an Endymion deck profile. So I'm really excited for you guys because this deck is an amazing pendulum deck that revolves around using spell counters to get some absolutely insane effects. It's a really fun deck to play around with, and I'm super excited to show you guys my list because I have some really amazing tech cards in this build. So without further ado guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell in there so you can come part of Notification Squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below for all those awesome rewards, like getting your name in the description of every single video, getting a signed card sent in the mail, and even getting to request a deck profile every single month you're a patron, along with test stands. So without further ado, let's get straight on into this one, guys. So first off, we're going to be playing 3 copies of Endymion, the Mighty Master of Magic, which is a great boss monster for this deck. It has a really awesome pendulum effect that you remove 6 spell counters from the field to special summon this card from the pendulum zone, and then count the number of cards you control that have spell counters on them and destroy that many cards on the field. And if you do, place spell counters on this card equal to the number of destroyed, and you can only use each effect of this card once per turn. It also has a really awesome monster effect that once per turn, when a spell or trap card is activated, quick effect, you can return one card you control that has a spell counters on it to your hand, and then if you do, negate the activation. If you do that, destroy it. Then you can place the same number of spell counters on this card that card had that was returned to your hand, which is a really awesome effect to be able to just not lose any of those spell counters. You're just going to put them on this card instead. It also has the ability that while this card has a spell counter on it, your opponent cannot target this card with card effects, and it can't be destroyed by your opponent's card effects either. And when this card with a spell counters on it is destroyed, you can add a normal spell from your deck to your hand. Really awesome effect to have for this card, and an absolutely insane boss monster. We then play 2 copies of Reflection of Endymion. I did consider playing this card as a 3 of in my build, but I ended up playing it at just 2. It's a really good card because it has the pendulum effect that each time a spell card is activated, you place a spell counter on this card after that spell resolves, and you remove 3 spell counters from this card to special summon both this card from your pendulum zone and a monster from your hand. Then place a spell counters on it, and if you do, you place 1 spell counter on each, which is really good to be able to just get an additional 2 monsters on your side of the field. And also it's a scale 2, so it's a really good card. We then play 2 copies of Magister of Endymion. This card is a good 2 of as well. I did consider playing this card as a 3 of, but one of the techs I ended up playing as a 3 of. I cut this down to 2, but this card is a really good card because it is a scale 8, and it also has a really good pendulum effect that each time a spell card is activated, you place a spell counter on this card when that spell resolves, and you can remove 3 spell counters from this card and then special summon both this card from your pendulum zone and 1 monster from your extra deck that you can place a spell counter on. If you do, you place a spell counter on each, which is really good. It also has a really good monster effect that you can special summon this card once per turn, but you can only special summon this card once per turn, and when this card declares an attack, you place a spell counter on it, and once per opponent's turn, quick effect, you can remove 3 spell counters from this card and then special summon 1 monster from your deck that you can place a spell counter on. And if this card in the monster zone is destroyed, you can place this card in your pendulum zone and then place the same number of spell counters on it that it had as a monster, which is really good. We then play a single copy of Servant of Endymion. This card is unfortunately still at 1, but if it does come back, I would definitely play this card as a 3 of because it's just absolutely insane. It has a really good monster effect that you can only special summon Servant of Endymion once per turn, and this card with the spell counter, it can attack your opponent directly, which is a really awesome effect just to be able to attack your opponent directly with 900 attack points. It helps out a lot in time, but it also has the ability that once per opponent's turn, quick effect, you can discard a card and then place 1 spell counter on each card that you control that you can place a spell counter on. And if this card in the monster zone is destroyed, you can place this card in your pendulum zone with the same amount of spell counters it had as a monster. But its pendulum effect is absolutely nuts, that each time a spell card is activated, you place a spell counter on this card and you remove 3 spell counters from this card, special summon both this card from your pendulum zone and 1 monster from your deck with 1,000 or more attack points that you can place a spell counter on, which is really good to be able to summon out cards like your Endymion directly from the deck. We then play 3 copies of Magical Abductor. This card is a really good 3 of as well because of its pendulum effect that each time a spell card is activated, you put a spell counter on it, and you can remove 3 spell counters from this card to add a pendulum monster from your deck to your hand, which is really good to be able to search any of your pendulum monsters that you need. We then play 3 copies of Mythical Beast Master Cerberus. Mythical Beast Master Cerberus is a really, really good card for this deck because it has a really good monster effect that basically can just get absolutely huge. It can remove 4 spell counters from it, target a monster opponent controls, and banish it, and then it gains the original attack that that monster had, and it's just a really good boss monster for the deck. It also has a really good pendulum effect that if you have no cards in your other pendulum zone, you can destroy this card. If you do, you get to add a level 7 or lower Mythical Beast effect monster from your deck to your hand, which is really awesome because we can search cards like our Mythical Beast Jackal King from our deck to our hand, which is really, really nice and just a really good card to be able to search with this monster's effect. We then play 2 copies of Jackal King. Jackal King is a good card. I only play it as a 2-of in this deck because we can search it with Master Cerberus, and this card is just a really good walking negate for the deck, and it's an overall fantastic card. We then play a single copy of Garuda. Garuda is a good 1-of in the deck, but I did consider cutting it for another copy of either Reflection or my copy of Magister, but this card is a really good 1-of in the deck because if you have no cards in your other pendulum zone, you can target one other spell or trap on the field and destroy both it and this card, which is really good to be able to just have a spot removal, basically MST in pendulum form. We then play a single copy of Astrograph Sorcerer because it's single-handedly one of the best pendulum monsters ever created, because it has the ability that if a card you control is destroyed by battle or by card effect, you can special summon this card from your hand, and then you can choose a monster in your graveyard, extra deck, or that's banished that was destroyed this turn, and add a monster with the same name from your deck to your hand. Really good effects to be able to just get any card that you need from your deck to your hand off this monster's effect. We then play 3 copies of Chronograph Sorcerer. Chronograph Sorcerer is really good because if a card is destroyed by battle or by card effect, you can special summon this card from your hand, and then you can special summon 1 monster from your hand, which is a really good effect to be able to just get cards out like Endymion to your field and just establish a really good board presence with this monster. But it's overall just a really good pendulum card because it's also a scale 8. We then play a single copy of Time Gazer Magician. Time Gazer Magician works with the Chronograph, which is why we're playing it as 1-of. And then we're playing 3 copies of Magician Soul. Magician Soul is a really good card to be able to draw cards in this deck, and it has the ability that you can send up to 2 spells from your hand or field to the graveyard and then draw that many cards. And if this card is in your hand, you can send a level 6 or higher spellcaster type monster from your deck to the graveyard to special summon this card, which is a really awesome effect. I play 3 copies of it. You don't have to play 3 copies of it in this build. You can drop it for Jester Comfy. You can drop it for additional copies of Garuda. You can drop it for your copies of Reflection of Endymion and Magister. You have plenty of options in this particular build that you can drop this card out to be able to make it a little bit more budget. But if you have it, definitely play it. We then play 2 copies of Spellbook Magician of Prophecy. Spellbook Magician of Prophecy is one of the best normal summons in this deck because when you normal summon it to your side of the field, you can add a Spellbook spell card from your deck to your hand, which is going to get a lot of your plays rolling. So that's it for the monsters, guys. Let's get into the spells. So for the spells, we're going to be playing a single copy of Terraforming. Terraforming is a really good 1-of in this deck to be able to add our really awesome field spell from our deck to our hand. 2 copies of Spellbook of Secrets, which can search any spellbook card except itself from your deck to your hand, even your Spellbook Magician. We play 2 copies of Spellbook of Knowledge, which this card is really good for draw power in the deck to be able to basically send to your graveyard either 1 spellcaster you control or 1 other spellbook card from your hand or face up from your field to be able to draw 2 cards, which is really good. We then play 2 copies of Magical Citadel of Endymion. Magical Citadel of Endymion is basically like a bank for all of your spell counters, which is really good. And each time a spell card is activated, you place 1 spell counter on this card, and then when that spell resolves, and if a card with a spell counter is destroyed, you place its spell counters on this card, so you never really lose your spell counters, and this card basically can hold all those spell counters that you have on the field, which is really awesome. And then once per turn, if you would activate a spell or effect by removing a spell counters from a card on the field, you can remove them from this card instead, which is really good. We then play a single copy of Mythical Institute, which is just a really good 3-of in the deck. I really like this card because it works really well with our Mythical Beast Pendulum monsters, and it works really well with Citadel, so it's why I play it as a 3-of. We then play 3 copies of the Searcher of the deck, which is Spell Power Mastery. Spell Power Mastery lets you add an Endymion card from your deck to your hand, and then you can count the number of Spell Power Mastery and Spell Power Grasp cards that you control or in the graveyard, and then place that many spell counters among cards that you control that you can place a spell counter on, which is really, really good. So as the game goes on, the better you get with this card. So That's it for the main deck, guys. Let's get into the extra deck. So for the extra deck, we're going to be playing 2 copies of Selene, Queen of the Master Magicians. This card is a really, really good 2-of because of her link arrows to be able to just pendulum summon to all of those different zones, which is really nice. She works with spell counters and can bring back spellcasters from the graveyard, which is really, really nice to be able to just use that ability. And she also has the ability, if this card is link summon, you can place spell counters on this card equal to the number of spell cards on the field or in the graveyard. And while Endymion card is on the field, your opponent's monsters cannot target this card for attacks, which is really good to be able to then pendulum summon into her zones, which is really, really nice. And then once per turn during your main phase, you can remove 3 spell counters from the field to special summon a spellcaster monster from your hand or graveyard in defense position to a zone this card points to. We then play a single copy of Appaloosa, Bow of the Goddess, which is a really good 1-of in the deck, especially for the zones, to be able to have as additional monster negation. 1 copy of Access Code Talker to give us an additional boss monster in the deck to be able to pop cards on the field. You can play Boral Sword if you want to instead of this card, which is another really good option for you guys. 1 copy of Nightmare Unicorn to spin stuff, Phoenix to pop spells and traps, Cerberus to pop monsters, and then a single copy of Daybreaker, the Shining Magical Warrior. I really like this card in the deck. It came with the structure deck for Endymion a long time ago, but it's a really good 1-of because it does revolve around spell counters. And if this card is link summon, you can place a spell counter on it and it gains 300 attack for each spell counter on it, and you can activate one of the following effects per turn. That if a spellcaster monster is special summoned to a zone this card points to, place 1 spell counter on this card, and you remove a spell counter from this card and then target a card on the field and destroy it, which is really good that it's a good spot removal monster with those 2 downward link arrows to be able to climb into something like a Selene or something else while also being able to pop a card. We then play a single copy of Crowley, the first Prophecyr. Prophecyr is a really good card in the deck because it's just an overall fantastic card that if it's link summoned, you reveal 3 spellbook cards with different names in your deck, and your opponent randomly picks one of them and adds it to your hand. So you can reveal Knowledge, Secret, and Spellbook Magician, which is really, really good to be able to reveal all those cards and then randomly get one of them to your hand. And it's just a really awesome card for this deck. We then play a single copy of IP Masquerena because you can go into your copy of Unicorn or Appaloosa during your opponent's turn, which is really awesome. 1 copy of Cross Sheep for one of the fusion monsters that we're playing later on. 1 copy of Gravity Controller so we can get something out of our extra monster zone that's a pendulum monster, which is really, really nice because it has the ability that it takes 1 non-link monster in the extra monster zone. So you can use pendulum monsters to summon out this card, which is really nice, while also giving you a downward arrow. We then play a single copy of Artemis. Artemis is just a really good card in any spellcaster deck, and I really like this card as a 1-of. 1 copy of Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon. Absolute Dragon is one of the cards that we're making that's not a link monster in this deck, so we can make a copy of Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon, which is why we play the Cross Sheep in this deck, so we can get the fusion effect off of our Cross Sheep. But this card is really good because it's a walking negate, and it's just a really good card. So that's it for the deck, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. It's a really fun deck to be able to play with. If you guys have never played with Endymion before, you definitely should because it's a super fun pendulum deck that just revolves around being able to put spell counters on a bunch of different cards that you have on your side of the field to be able to get some really powerful effects. One thing I would recommend as you're playing with this deck though, definitely carry around a dice with you because you're going to need it, or a bunch of dice with you because you're going to need it while you're playing this deck to keep up with all those spell counters that you're going to be putting on your cards. So that's it for this one, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell in there so you can become part of Notification Squad, and we'll see you guys in the next video. See you later, guys.